For all of our English speakers on the call, you will also want to join the English channel once we begin the interpretation. Here are the instructions. If you are joining from a computer, then you will first click on the globe symbol in the bottom right corner of your screen. Then you will select the option for the language that you speak. If you're joining from a smartphone, you will click on the three dots in the bottom right corner of your screen, then select the option with the globe symbol, and then select your language and press done at the top right corner. Now we'll give the instructions in Spanish.
Interpretación en una computadora. Haga clic en el globo terráqueo ubicado en la esquina derecha abajo de su pantalla. Seleccione la opción para el lenguaje que usted habla. Interpretación en un teléfono inteligente. Haga clic en los tres puntos ubicados en la esquina derecha abajo de su pantalla. Seleccione la opción con el símbolo de globo. Seleccione su lenguaje, presione Done, D-O-N-E, arriba en la esquina derecha de su pantalla.
And now we will give the instructions in Portuguese.
Interpretação em um computador. Clique no símbolo de um globo no canto inferior direito da sua tela. Selecione a opção para o idioma que você fala. Interpretação em um telefone inteligente. Selecione clique nos três pontinhos no canto inferior direito da sua tela. Selecione a opção com o símbolo de um globo. Selecione o seu idioma. Aperte Done no canto superior direito.
And now we will give instructions in Haitian Creole.
Okay.
Interprétation dans langue créole haïtienne. Interprétation dans un computer. Cliquez sur le symbole globe là en bas à droite, dans le coin dans l'écran. Sélectionnez option pour langue ou parler. Interprétation dans un téléphone intelligent, smartphone. Cliquez dans trois points en bas à droite dans le coin écran 1. Sélectionnez option qui gagne symbole globe là. Sélectionnez langue ou pesez Done en l'air à droite dans le coin.
Okay, we will now begin interpretation. I will need a couple of minutes just to start this up.
I just want to mention, I think the point was raised earlier by someone else. What do we tell the people? Because as of right now, the software that you're using still doesn't include Creole. I see Spanish and Spanish too.
Yep, Mark,
so I don't know whether we should.
I'm about to open the channels right now, and then you will be automatically assigned into your channel.
Okay, but what do we tell
people? It does
people?
Include Creole.
It does include, okay, all right.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to press start right now. And from then on, interpreters, we can begin simultaneous interpretation. Okay. And everyone should see that globe symbol pop up, and you can select English or Haitian Creole or Portuguese or Spanish. And if you are unless you speak all four of those languages, you will want to select at least one of the interpretation channels. All right, I'll hand it over to Ben, or a member of the city staff team.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you to the team. Just give me one moment to get everything set up. Okay, great. So hello, everyone, and welcome to a community update on the Gilman Square area being hosted on Wednesday, February 1st from 6 to 7:30 p.m. My name is Ben Demers. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an economic development planner with the City of Somerville's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Okay. And let me just quickly send out a message. So a few quick notes about Zoom before we get into more substantive content tonight. So all participants will join Zoom with muted microphones, and we ask that you keep your microphone muted when you are not speaking. When you join, please feel encouraged to rename yourself to include your first and last name, if Zoom is not listing these already, as well as other descriptors like your pronouns or organization if you would like to share these. If you have any technical questions throughout the meeting, please send a message to me, Ben Demers, either through the chat box or to my email at bdemers@somerville.ma.gov, and I'll be checking that regularly as we go. And then lastly, if you have questions about the content of today's meeting, I'll get into this more in a minute, but we'll host a Q&A at the end of the meeting. But please feel welcome to also send in questions as we're going, and I'll be collecting those, and then our speakers can answer those during the Q&A period at the end. So the main goals of today's meeting are twofold. So first, we'll be communicating updates from city departments on several topic areas in the Gilman Square area, and on the Homan site in particular. And the Homan site, for those not familiar, refers to 350 Medford Street, which used to be the site of what is called the Homan's Building, which is why we refer to it as the Homan site that has since been demolished. And you may better know it as the site where construction equipment was stored during construction of the Green Line station for the past few years. And then second, we'll also aim to answer any questions that come up regarding these topics. This type of update was something that we heard would be helpful from several community members, so hopefully you find the information tonight very useful. To review in more detail what the agenda looks like, so after this introductory section, we'll hear more from Viola Augustine, Senior Planner with OSPCD's Mobility Division, about mobility-related updates in Gilman Square, including the opening of the Green Line station and a temporary detour to the community path. You'll also then hear from Greg Jenkins, the Executive Director of the Somerville Arts Council, who will give an update on the status of art on the TPSS building, which is the MBTA substation located directly next to the Homan site. We'll then shift to hear from Brian Postlethwaite, the city's Director of Engineering, about flood mitigation infrastructure in the Gilman Square area, including the citywide flood mitigation and water quality master plan that was published in November. Fourth, we'll hear from Rachel Nutt-Carney, the Acting Director of Economic Development, on the long-term development potential of the Homan site. And then this will lead to a final piece on temporary uses in Gilman Square in the short term, which I will lead. And then we're planning to leave about 30 minutes for Q&A. You'll probably have a bit more time for Q&A, given the amount of topics we're covering in today's meeting, to answer any remaining questions and to capture feedback. Right. Now, this is obviously a site that is not just of interest to city departments, it's also of interest to a lot of different people in the community, many of whom are doing great work to influence how it is ultimately used. So we want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank some of those community members and groups in Gilman Square. Just give me one moment. Sorry, just having a quick tech issue. Okay. Before we hop into things, I do also want to give a moment for Councillor Klingon. I know you're on the call. I want to hand things over if you want to say hello and anything else you might want to add to this conversation. So I'll ask you to unmute. Okay, you might also have stepped away from. Oh, there we go.
I was actually just messaging you, Ben, in case if this happened. I'm actually in the ZBA meeting. They're discussing 299 Broadway. So, but I will be back as soon as they're done over here. I guess I'll just say I hope we can get to the. I hope there's a great update from engineering about the plans for the water management. I know there's a lot of questions in the public's mind, and so the sooner we can get to that, the better. And just look forward to hearing what's to come. Thanks.
Great. And I see also that Councillor Strezzo is on the call. Councillor Strezzo, if you'd like to also unmute and say hello, I definitely invite you to do so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here. I'm going to stay on the call as long as I can. and I don't have much to say. I'm ready to learn and see what the latest is, and also hear from you. You can reach out to me, 617-2009-9915, and email us strozo@large@gmail.com for any additional thoughts you have after this meeting. And thanks for everyone's advocacy and hard work on this.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we also have Councilor Ewan Campanile.
Hey, everybody. I won't take any time. I want to get to these updates. As far as I know, this is the first community meeting we've had since the train station opened. So I think there's a lot more kind of urgency and energy to seeing what we can do, particularly with the Homan site and with the rest of the square. Thank you all for being here.
Very awesome. Thank you, councilors, for joining us. So I also want to turn, like I mentioned, to highlight some of the groups who are doing work on Gilman Square. The first that I'll highlight is the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association, which is a community group made up of people who live and work in Gilman Square that, amongst other things, host regular meetings to discuss the square's future and organize events to build a local sense of community. And I'll hand it over to Christine Carlino, one of the co-presidents of the GSNA's board, to talk a bit more about their work.
Thanks, Ben. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be a little bit more long-winded than our awesome city councilors, but good evening, everyone. My name is Christine Carlino. I'm the president of the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association. I just want to thank Ben and Rachel for giving us the opportunity to speak really quickly. Just to be clear, so everyone is not confused by this, GSNA is not a co-sponsor or a co-host of this particular meeting, though we have been in the past, but we're going to be hearing updates and commenting along with all of you today. GSNA is a grassroots 501c3 nonprofit organization with the goal of bringing our diverse and dynamic community together through cultural events and community advocacy. I want to acknowledge for a lot of people today that this conversation is likely going to be extremely frustrating, especially for folks in the community who have been working on the visioning of Gilman Square since the publishing of the Gilman Square Station Area Plan published back in 2014. To be now, almost a decade later, still having no progress or imminent plans for the site due to the site being held hostage by a stormwater tank is both angering and unnecessary. We want to let you know that we hear you and we're actively working on a viable alternative with partners in City Council, our community, other community organizations, environmental activist groups such as Green and Open Somerville and Save the Alewife Brook, as well as we are in contact with local folks at the EPA and Mass DEP, Department of Environmental Protections, on using innovative green infrastructure solutions through a demonstration project on Medford Street to eliminate the need for a tank and make development and activation of this site immediately available. While we have presented this to city engineering in the past, we have yet to establish a good working partnership with them, which we very much hope to do. And while we are not holding our breath, I will happily eat my words tonight should we see that city engineering has pivoted to include green infrastructure and support a safer, healthier, sustainable, and more environmentally resilient Gilman Square. I won't get into any more detail, but as Ben mentioned, if you're interested in finding out more about this, we will be talking about this in depth at our next meeting, which is February 6th, so next Monday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. You can find us on the Facebook page that Ben has kindly put on this slide, as well as email us directly at gilmansquaresomerville@gmail.com. And again, that meeting will be on February 6th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. and it will be virtual. So thank you all, and we're looking forward to hearing all of the updates today.
Thank you, Christine. And then the second group that I want to mention is the Gilman Square Civic Advisory Committee, which is a committee made up of several community stakeholders in the Gilman Square area that was created last year to help guide the city and the Somerville Redevelopment Authority in making decisions regarding the potential disposition of city-owned parcels in the heart of Gilman Square. The CAC is a public committee supported by city staff, and they host meetings on the fourth Thursday of every month from 5:30 to 7 p.m. for anyone interested in attending. And I'm going to hand things over to two CAC members, Diana Marsh and Ben Elgart, to talk about some of the recent work of the committee.
Okay, thanks. I can go first. And Ben Demers, your volume is a little low. I don't know if you're a little far from the microphone or something. But,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think our CAC has been around for about a year. We had a community meeting last March where we got a lot of great feedback. I think there were almost 100 people on that meeting. And since then, we have been talking to various groups in the community to get their feedback and ideas for the Gilman Square site that the city owns. So we met with the residents of the Pearl Street Senior Housing. Some people went to talk to the Portuguese church on School Street, and we've also met with some high school students in the high school about what they'd like to see on the site. And maybe I'll just mention some of the things that we've heard from people, and then I'll let Ben Elgart add whatever he wants to add. Is that okay, Ben? So some of the things we heard were having housing on the site, and particularly affordable housing, having places for people to gather, nice public open spaces, and kind of more urban spaces like plazas. The teenagers are very interested in having places for teens to hang out, which are not necessarily compatible with something like a bar or something, because they often feel like grown-ups sort of take over certain kinds of spaces. So they want to have a space that feels comfortable for kids and teenagers to use. Everybody is interested in seeing some retail and particularly dining here. There seems to be more interest in more casual, kind of affordable food that would be great for takeout, and good for high school students and people in the neighborhood to just get a simple bite to eat, as opposed to like a fancy sit down kind of place. Of course, another big concern is trying to improve the connections to the train. With the budget cuts that the MBTA station had, there's only the 2 connections to the Green Line to the station from either end of that block. And so we're very interested in seeing how we can use new development to improve connections directly to the train platform from the site, whether that's like an elevator that takes you up and over the catenary wires to the platform that comes off of School Street, or maybe some kind of an escalator within some new buildings, something like that. So I guess I'll stop there and let Ben chime in. You're still muted, Ben.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ben Elgart. My pronouns are he, him. I both sit on the CAC and on the board of the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association. As a representative of the board, I have been able to share input that we get from the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association and relay it through the community process of the CAC. The work of the CAC, as Diana has pointed out, has brought a lot of ideas to the forefront. One way that the CAC has also explored the opportunities around the Homan site and other city-owned sites in Gilman Square was this fall during a walkthrough. We walked the area in order to understand the context for any development. This walkthrough went across both Medford Street, the bridge, as well as School Street, and also down Pearl Street, to really help understand how development would connect all these parts of the square. After that, we consolidated those thoughts and these and relayed them. This information is part of the record of what we're learning and what we think should inform updates to the square. The thing that I wanted to highlight is also that we've been using this venue in order to bring ideas both from the community into the process of building a record, and also bringing information from or sourcing information from city departments and bringing it back to the community. We look forward for this meeting to continue in that spirit. I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Ben. Also, I'm just going to give one last reminder that both for presenters today, but also for members of the public as we're asking questions later, to just speak as slowly as possible. I know this applies to me as well. So just a reminder. And then I also want to reiterate one thing that Christine mentioned, which is that just for the sake of clarity, the membership of the CAC and the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association are learning things tonight at the same time as the public. So we'll very likely have questions on the topics that we discuss at the same time. So just want to emphasize that. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Viola to get us started.
Evening, everybody. I'm Viola Augustine. I am a planner in the mobility division for the city of Somerville. And many of you have seen me in other presentations for the Gilman Square Streetscape project. And also, in addition to having been a project manager on that, I'm also still coordinating Green Line related topics throughout the city. So next slide. So we all, I hope, are excited that the Gilman Square station finally opened and the Medford branch is open. And you know it better probably than I do where the stations are, but I thought to quickly point out that there are two entrances, one from School Street and one from the community path. And you probably all have noticed that you cannot reach the station on the community path from School Street. And that is in the dashed line indicated there. The reason for that is the continuous high school construction. And that project still needs to build a retaining wall right adjacent to the community path. So the amount of construction traffic made it necessary to have that portion of the community path and that side of the access to the station closed until that work is done. Next slide. Due to that closure, once the community path opens, and I will talk, I know that we're all waiting for the community path to be open, and we have gotten a lot of questions about that, especially since it looks like it's done. So I just want to reiterate, it is still closed right now, and there are two main efforts that are still on the way. A, the construction of the path has to be completed, and there are the list of things that still need to be done range from some of the fences are not open, are not completed, especially the fence to the railroad corridor sometimes have gaps. Some of the fences on the viaduct are not installed yet. Some lighting is not installed. Some of the pavement needs to be fixed or still finished. All that leads to most likely construction not until later in the spring finish. So we're not looking at a February open, most likely not at a March either. And this is what we heard from the MBTA. Parallel to that, the city is going to take ownership of the maintenance of that community path. So we have been working for a long time now on a maintenance agreement that both the MBTA and the city feel comfortable with. And that is in the last steps of being finalized, and then it has to go through council approval. So that is still ongoing. So I just want to reiterate, it looks great and we all want to use it, but it is still closed. And I'd like to, for everybody to be a little more patient. We waited for so long. I think it's worth another month to get like a path that can open and not immediately close, because GLXC still has to patch a concrete part and close the commuter path between two street entrances. The dashed line again here, the detour. This is really what the slide is about. Once the community path opens in spring, this part of the community path will still be closed. And we don't know for how long yet. It could be a year or even more That is what we heard from the construction team of the high school. So for that period, we're currently working on a detour that will go down and up School Street and down and up Medford Street, including the bridge, to then connect to the community path again at the Medford Street entrance. That will most likely or will be a two-way bicycle lane, protected so that it simulates a safe off-street path as much as we can. As part of that, we're looking into turning Medford Street into one-way so that we can use one lane for this two-way bicycle lane. We don't have the details yet, but we're working on it. We're trying to find materials, the barriers, to make sure that we have a protected bike lane. Next slide. The other project that I mentioned earlier that we all, hopefully most of you know about, that the city had worked on streetscape improvements around these new sites to be developed. We had a conceptual design phase, and then last year, 2022, we finished the 60% design set. And these are just some slides, some views that the design team produced. So the major improvements that beyond traffic calming due to like a chicane, you see that on the left view down Medford Street, we will have a two-way bicycle connection down Medford Street. And on the right, it continues on Pearl Street all the way to Skilton. And in the future, which was not part of the scope of this, a two-way bicycle connection up School Street. All of that is also in our newly published bicycle network plan. So it's all coming together, at least as a vision. And some of the other features, there will be additional crosswalks and safer crosswalk at Medford and Pearl. You see that on the left and on the right. We are accommodating when we can parking, at least on one side in between School Street and Pearl Street. And we're trying to keep those parking flexible, meaning that they could be used either for parking or for future food trucks, and depending on the needs of the square now and in the future. We have held on moving it to 100% construction documentation, because clearly this next step needs to very closely work with development on the site. So doesn't make sense to move forward and then we will not put curb cuts for development on the home site in the right place. We want to work with the developer to possibly implement some of these improvements. So right now there is no further update on it. Obviously, if anybody has questions, please, you can email me directly, viola@somervillema.com, or through transportation@somervillema.com. And that was my part. I believe I'm handing it over to Greg Jenkins.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? So I'm Gregory Jenkins. I work with the city and the city's Arts Council. I think a number of you may be here in this meeting, but last spring, working with Viola and city staff, Rachel, and then also people within the community, we created a committee and formed, with local artists, GSNA. We developed an RFQ and an RFP type of process to essentially put out to the local community of the region. The first one brought back sort of 30 applications, and from there, that committee essentially reviewed them and then made a decision on selecting 3 finalists, and then we paid 3 finalists some money to develop full proposals. And then from that, there was an artist group, Anna Jacobs and their team, who the committee settled on, and this is some of their work. So we then turned around and submitted a full proposal to the MBTA, through their application, and it came back denied, which was a little surprising given the fact that all before we started this process, there was a sort of a mutual decision on behalf of the city, mobility, the Arts Council, the MBTA's capital project team, that we would be, doing public art on this, TPS site. At this point, there was a decision. We wrote back to the MBTA asking for reconsideration from the mayor's office, and we have not really gotten a solid response. And so internally, we just made the decision. This was also during the fall with the new gubernatorial election, that we would just wait until the new year. And so we're essentially, and then there was also a new general manager. Pollock is leaving or has left, I think, already. So the MBTA is going through a little bit of administration transition as well. So our tactic is to hopefully reach back out in the next couple of weeks and push for this agreement that, you know, that we had all discussed last year. So that's kind of the update. I think a lot of you can, you know, reach me at the Arts Council. Like, again, it's gjenkins@somervillema.gov. And obviously, if there's questions at the end, I'll be here to answer. Thank you. And I don't know who's next. I'm sorry. I should look at it. Stormwater.
Yes, Greg, I believe that's me. Good evening, all. I'm Brian Polstwaite, the Director of Engineering. I work closely with our IAM Director, Rich Raish, and I also lead our city's team of engineers who manage, plan, design, and construct our sewer and drain improvements throughout the city. Next slide. So the first thing that I wanted to remind many people and tell those who don't know is that the city just completed our citywide drainage master plan last fall. And coming out of that research and study, though we studied multiple different storms, the 10-year storm is the storm that's most easily communicable to the city. And we use that as the basis of a lot of our communications. Thus, when you see our flood maps, that's primarily what we use. And in doing so, we identified over 25 discrete flooding zones throughout the city. And 2 of those flooding zones are located in the Gilman Square area, primarily what we've labeled here as Gilman Square and Richdale Ave. These 2 flooding areas are located in what we call drainage area S2, but in big picture is about a third to a half of the city that drains to the Mystic River watershed. Next slide, Ben. As part of that study, one of our primary goals was to identify the root cause of why these areas flood. So without understanding the cause of the flooding, we can't find an economic, effective, and efficient solution that we can implement for that flooding. The key element in the Gilman Square area is that the primary cause of flooding is what we call trunk capacity limitations. In this case, and Ben, I don't know if you can run your mouse over it, but there is an orange line that goes down Marshall Street, no, closer to Gilman Square, between the 2 green areas. That is Marshall Street. You can kind of see an orange line that goes towards Broadway. That is the Marshall Street drain. And that drain is the primary conduit for stormwater exiting Gilman Square. And between that and a constrained outfall into the MWRA combined sewer system, there is not the capacity to meet the flooding or the flood minimization goals that the city has for Gilman Square. This is a concern for much of the area in the S2 area, and is also part of the challenge you'll see in other areas of S2. We have local capacity limitations. Those local capacity limitations are also constrained by not having a free outfall to the river. All of our stormwater outfall, or the vast majority of the stormwater outfall in S2, goes to the MWRA combined sewer, which just creates a large limitation of what we can do to manage stormwater in Gilman Square and the S2 region in general. Next slide, Ben. So green stormwater infrastructure is a component of these solutions. We've been working with green stormwater infrastructure for over 10 years on all of our stormwater capital projects, and they will continue to be featured and used as a very important and critical tool, not unlike much of our other green infrastructure in the city. We not only include green stormwater infrastructure, but also our amazing tree canopy that our PSAF department and our DPW maintain. The infrastructure that we use to manage stormwater is not limited to just pipes and tanks and pumps. All of these pieces play a key role in managing stormwater. What is even more critical for green stormwater infrastructure is that it is one of the best ways to manage stormwater quality in our system. It is better than most mechanical devices, and it is very space effective. And these elements are only going to be becoming more important as we separate the city's sewer and increase the amount of stormwater that discharges directly to the Mystic and Charles Rivers. We need to make sure that that stormwater is as clean as we can make it. And green stormwater and green storm infrastructure is one of the primary methods that we have to affect that water quality. But one of the next most important thing about green stormwater infrastructure is that it has amazing co-benefits. It creates wonderful areas for tree preservation. It improves that part of our infrastructure. It helps green our streets. It helps make a more walkable and livable environment, and also provides amazing benefits to traffic calming and humanizing our streets. As we go through and work more on green stormwater infrastructure, we also are looking at how we can use it to affect our combined sewer overflows and decrease them. And right now we're working on a region-wide program with Cambridge and the MWRA to study and find solutions for the combined sewer overflows in the region, primarily that discharge to Alewife Brook, the Mystic River, and the Charles River. And we anticipate green stormwater infrastructure being a part of that solution. It won't be the only part of that solution, but it will be a part of that solution. As we're moving through studying it presently and over the next 6 to 8 months, when we conclude that element, we will be having a public meeting for the entire region, which I hope many of the attendees tonight will be joining in on and hearing what we have found. Next slide, Ben. But returning to the citywide stormwater master plan, that master plan prioritized a group of projects to resolve the flooding in various segments of the city. This is a multiple decades long project, but in doing this, we prioritized it to the most, not only the most important, but the most likely projects that will have the greatest impact. These are projects that don't necessarily predicate a solution, but they're identifying areas where we know that a solution is most readily achievable. So these high priority projects are the ones that are most likely to occur the soonest. I've highlighted the Richdale Ave and Bradley Street area here because that clearly ran into the higher level of our priority list. But as I was speaking about earlier, one of the critical pieces here is to get a good system to work, we need to have a good outfall. And so what we are currently working on is the two highlighted in blue above, which here are labeled as Tin Hills Road and Jake Street area. Those two projects are going to be combined into a single project that, with the goal of creating a new clear outlet for stormwater for the S2 region, so that we have a clear outfall, so we can start minimizing and reducing those trunk capacity limitations that are downstream, providing more capacity for Gilman Square to drain out. Now, this initial prioritization envisioned a tank in the Holman Street or in the Holman site. And though that is the best thinking that we came up with out of this master plan study, that is not, none of those solutions were intended to be the final decision. Each of these projects have to go through a design process where we work with various engineers, various stakeholders, and the community to find what's the best solution that can effectively, efficiently, and economically solve the that project is intending to solve. And in this case, predominantly increasing trunk capacity and reducing flooding in various parts of our city, and particularly in S2. That all said, a tank at the Holman Street site may end up being the best solution, but we don't know yet. And we won't know until we move forward and reach more closely to a design completion for the blue projects highlighted here. In the interim, we know that there's a lot of development pressures, and we believe from the engineering department that a tank proposal in the Holmans should in no way encumber or slow down development progress on the Holman Street site. When we get to the point where we're solving the Richdale Ave, Bradley Street area flooding in particular on a capital improvement project, we will be basing it on the existing conditions at that time. And if the Holman site isn't available, we will find another comparable place that solves the problem as well as that would. So the goal is not to slow down development, but if the project timelines line up, we will collaborate and coordinate with them. I'd like to hand it over to Rachel because I think she is going to carry on more information about the Holman site.
Yes, thanks, Brian. So good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Ned-Carney. I'm the Acting Director of Economic Development. And this is exciting news. For the last few months, especially as the Stormwater Master Plan has been wrapping up, we've been on pause to really understand what the implication of the Stormwater Plan would mean for the city-owned site, like the Holman site. Ben, could you jump to the next slide? So I'm going to do, this map is differently oriented, so I'm going to just take a minute while we're here just to say, in all the maps we've looked at before, north was up. In this image, you'll see that the high school and city hall are at the top. We're looking up the hill towards Central Hill, up towards Central Hill, with the station sort of in the middle. That's that big white line. And then the city-owned sites are labeled here 1 and 2, and the mobile station, which is adjacent to the city-owned properties, is labeled number 3. The city owns these two different parcels in Gilman Square. One is that Gilman triangle, that is that green spot. And number 2 is the Holman site that we've been talking so much about. And I wanted to make sure we take a moment to show you all that in an aerial view so you could get a good sense of it. The other reason we've highlighted the mobile site is that going back to the 2014 neighborhood, the station area plan, the redevelopment of the Holman site was always envisioned as a collaboration or complementary planning with the mobile station, that the mobile station would redevelop alongside it. And so that's been part of the thinking on all of this. There was a lot of work done between 2014 and 2019 around all this. And then COVID happened and we've sort of re-energized just in this last year. Ben, if you could go to the next slide. So since there were a couple of years where we weren't able to do as much engagement, we wanted to do a check-in in this last year in 2022, just to confirm that a lot of the development priorities are still the same. I don't think many of these are different from what were discussed in the past. But the Civic Advisory Committee has been out in the community collecting a lot of different ideas. Diana went through these really well earlier, so I will not spend so much time on them. Flooding was one of these priorities. And so that's part of why we were making this decision to wait and figure out what the timeline of redevelopment for the long term would look like. Again, we've got confirmation of some of the priorities. We are going to move forward with planning for that long-term redevelopment of the site. We aren't going to be waiting for stormwater tanks to be designed. We are going to jump right ahead and move into the next steps. But if you could jump to the next one. And I want to return to the map just for 1 second and click once more, Ben. Perfect. And that as staff, if we've been looking at all this and as we've been talking with the CAC members and talking with others, we have been sort of narrowing in on that we should focus really at this point on the Homans and Mobile Station as a property. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that if we are going to build on the Triangle site, which might be a possibility down the line, we would need to make sure that we have an equal amount of green space accommodated on the Homans site first. And so there's a timing piece to that. The other thing is there's a lot more research we need to do on this green space. We've started to dig into it, that there's just more to learn about the history of that piece of land. It was not always a green space. It was at one point a building. We think at one point in the 50s, it may have been a used car lot. So there's a lot of research we need to understand still about that property. So focus instead at the moment is really on the Homans site that is the larger opportunity, and thinking about how the mobile station might fit into this process. Next one, Ben. So the first step in us being able to move forward with turning the Homans site over into a real development site is to go through a disposition study. The disposition study is actually going to look citywide at all of the buildings that might be transferable from city uses into other uses. So what does this exactly mean? The city is just wrapping up doing a capital improvement program that's looking at sort of what are all of the projects in the next 5-year pipeline for school buildings, city buildings, and infrastructure projects. On the heels of that, we are going to be looking at properties that might be ready to transfer out of city use and into other uses. So that's anything that could be transferring that property into being housing, could be looking at it being a nonprofit space, community, anything that is not run by the city as a department or the schools. So we are going to be looking at a variety of assets across the city. The Homans site will be one of those. We expect when we do a prioritization of those facilities that the Homans site is going to be one of the top. Because it is an open site, we've had a lot of community conversation around it already. And so there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of momentum for this property in a way that is in an earlier stage from many of the other properties around the city. But we do want to go through that process and just make sure that we are checking in about sort of fiscal responsibility and sort of hitting all those goals, because we do have folks clamoring for other properties to be redeveloped in their neighborhoods, in other neighborhoods as well. This process for the disposition study is likely to take a few months, and it's primarily internal work as we do that prioritization, and we will get that back out to the public as soon as it is ready. Where we go from there, Ben, next slide. From there are two approaches that we can take, and I want to lay them out for you all. And again, this is fresh information for the CAC, Gilman Square Neighborhood Association, city councilors, and everyone listening today. But also this is information that is similar processes have been gone through in other sites around the city. So Ben, if you click once, great. Our first option that we could go forward with is an urban renewal plan. Urban renewal, if you think back to the 60s, this tool has been around quite some time. Urban renewal is a tool that allows the city to take blighted private property and combine it for redevelopment, prepare it for redevelopment. We have active urban renewal plans in a couple of places in the city, one in Union Square, and as well as in Winter Hill. So for folks who are following the 299 Broadway project, that is an urban renewal area that was established in 2021, was when it was finally established. And that process to determine that it was going to be used for urban renewal did take a year and a half or so to get that through. Part of this is that a city taking property, private property, is a very sensitive topic. It's something that needs to be given due consideration and needs to be thought through thoroughly. So if we were to go down this route, we would absolutely be involving a community process to determine what sites in the neighborhood would be included, and the community would have a chance to review the urban renewal plan. One benefit potentially of going down the urban renewal route is that it could include multiple sites in the neighborhood. So it could include the mobile station as a blighted property that would be part of the plan. It could also include other sites to be identified. But again, this one does take a lot of sensitive thinking. Ben, if you could click once more. The second option is sort of a preliminary step that we think could be a really good alternative first step. You could jump to urban renewal, but I think this one might make sense as a step one instead. And that's to do what we call a request for information and qualifications. What this would be is a sort of semi-informal outreach to the development community. And what we would be looking for is to see, are there developers who would be interested in partnering to redevelop the city's home and site without the mobile station, as well as an opportunity to get an official perspective from the current mobile station owner to see if there's a route that would lead to collaboration without the city taking the property by eminent domain. Eminent domain is only under urban renewal. If we were to go this route, though, we could see if there is a real opportunity to work in collaboration outside that process. The other thing we can do in this request for information and qualifications is get some good feedback from developers around how they would view infrastructure challenges, like getting an elevator, escalator, funicular railroad opportunity up to the station. And we also can use this as a first step in that developer selection process. So if everything were to work out really well and we find a great partner that folks are comfortable with and the city and city council are comfortable with, we could move forward much more quickly, potentially under this process. So Ben, if you could click once more. So the recommendation right now is that we would go forward with request for information first, see what we get as a result from that. And then step two would be to go to the urban renewal if we needed to. Again, because one of the goals would be that we would get that solid information for, is the mobile site owner someone who would want to collaborate outside of a taking process. So those are the steps that we see sort of coming forward. Ben, if you could go to the next slide. But I want to be realistic about what it takes to pull either of these options together. For us to get to a place where we are actually actively doing construction, shovels in the ground, we think this, in either case, we're looking at least 2 years. That's going to be to go through the selection process, find partners to build on the site, take that project through design, permitting, get their construction documents together, and really get shovels in the ground. A wild card in all of this is that we are very actively trying to get grants for that up and over connection from Medford Pearl Street to the station. We might be able to do that as part of one of the key questions we'll have if we go this request for information route, is to say, hey, development community, how would you build an elevator, escalator, funicular between the core of Gilman Square and the station? And how would you finance that? But at the same time, we are not going to just wait for the private sector on this. We are going to actively pursue as many grants for engineering and design and construction of some of that kind of infrastructure as we can. So in the meanwhile, we do think, though, that there are opportunities to touch on some of the goals that have been brought up in the last several years, sort of during this interim period, so that we can continue working and moving forward with developer selection, but at the same time start to bring more activity to the square while we're going through that process. So Ben, I'll turn it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Okay. I know we're running a little bit over, so I will try to move through this relatively quickly. As Rachel mentioned, either development scenario will leave us with probably at least 2 years before construction would begin, during which time we can consider short-term uses and public activities on the site in order to start delivering on some of those development priorities that the community has identified, such as adding more activity in the square and representing Somerville's diverse culture. So to look quickly at how the Homan site is being used right now, it's largely vacant where the MBTA's equipment was being stored during the construction of the Green Line station. There is one corner at the northwest of the site along Medford Street and the mobile station, which is seen on the left of the image here, that is currently being used for overflow teacher parking by teachers at Somerville High School. But the site provides approximately 2/3 of an acre that can go to other activities. So at the CAC's October 2022 meeting, which was recorded and is up online, CAC members discussed some potential uses of the site after doing a site walk in September, as Ben mentioned earlier, and they were especially excited about the prospect of using all or a portion of the site for temporary recreational and community uses, and about programming the space with community input. CAC members looked to precedents in other cities such as the Lawn on D in Boston, which is a social space featuring glowing swings and a food and drink space, as well as Spark Social SF, which is a flexible space in San Francisco used for events like film screenings and small concerts. And I'll really stress that none of this is a temporary use that's already been selected. It's really rather resulting from an early brainstorming session about the site. So given the proximity to Somerville High School, CAC members also expressed that it would be great to involve high school students in the planning process to ensure that it's a space where they would want to spend time and where they would feel some sense of ownership. The conversation with the CAC also focused on how we can tie the site into the surrounding neighborhood. And this is true both in terms of potential uses, but also visually, given the impressive views down Medford Street and up the hill to the high school and City Hall. Now, while much of the discussion has been geared towards community uses, internal discussions about the site have also surfaced the need for additional snow storage within Somerville by its DPW. Snow storage is a very difficult function in Somerville because the city owns very little vacant land where snow can be stored effectively, but it's also crucial. Without proper snow storage, you can't have snow clearing, so moving throughout the city becomes very difficult, and this is especially true for people with mobility issues. Without a place to store snow, it's also difficult for the city to offer certain other services, such as having schools opened. So it's a very critical function, and the Homan site is one of the very few places where snow could be stored right now. So a portion of the site at the corner furthest from the teacher parking lot, which is, I believe, the southeast corner, has been identified for this use in the case of a snow emergency. When not being used for snow storage, that space dedicated to snow can also be used for what we call operational storage, so such as construction equipment. However, this still leaves a portion of the Homan site that could be used for those types of community activities that we in the CAC were discussing. Additionally, although the CAC conversation focused on the Homan site, and that's been the focus of a lot of the conversation tonight, temporary activities could be tied in with activities in other parts of Gilman Square, such as on the Gilman Triangle site that Rachel mentioned at the intersection of Pearl and Medford, and the Medford Street Bridge itself, which could be partially closed occasionally for specific activities. To facilitate this type of community programming, OSBCD's Economic Development Division is planning to apply for ARPA funding for an operator that can develop and run temporary activities in Gilman Square. And ARPA, if you have not heard this acronym before, it refers to the American Rescue Plan Act, which has dedicated funds for local and state governments to support the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. This operator would likely be tasked with things from community engagement to pinpoint which activities the wider community most wants to see, to determining the feasibility of these different sites for short-term activities, to then actually managing activities and events on those sites identified as eligible. And when I talk about feasibility of the sites here, that includes things like ensuring the sites do not need environmental remediation after being used to store construction equipment, which is a concern that we've heard from community members already. So just to reiterate, since either development scenario in Gilman Square will leave us with a couple of years before construction, we're looking to use several sites for temporary uses and activities. One of those uses on the Homan site will be snow and operational storage if needed, and then the city will be applying to ARPA funding to hire someone to help program the remaining space on the Homan site, as well as other areas in Gilman Square, like the Gilman Triangle and the Medford Street Bridge. Our plan is to apply for this ARPA funding over the next several months, with the expectation to hear back by late spring, so that we could then issue an RFP to find someone to operate the site. And I want to stress this process is very much ongoing and will be a major topic of Gilman Square Civic Advisory Committee meetings over the next few months as we work to get this ARPA ask right. So we would love for you to join and be a part of those conversations. And that concludes our presentation for this evening from city staff. So definitely want to thank everyone for their attention and their patience as we've gone through each of these pieces. We would love to hear any questions and comments that you might have. Just to review quickly how I'll be facilitating this Q&A. If you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function on Zoom, or you can type your question in the chat and I will monitor this and then I can relay those to the appropriate staff member. We also ask that you please speak for yourself, you be respectful of others, and that includes both attendees and staff, and also that you be as brief as possible so that we can make sure we hear from everyone this evening. We usually give about 2 minutes for individual comment. You're also more than welcome to ask a question or make a comment in any language, and the interpreters will interpret it in other languages being offered here this evening. This will also mean that I might give a moment to interpret after each question if needed. And then the last thing I'll say before we really do hop into Q&A, if you cannot stay but you have a question or comment that you would like to make, we've listed the contacts here for various city staff who you can reach out to, and you can see that on the screen. So with that, we will shift into Q&A. And I can start off here with Stephen Nutter.
Okay, I wasn't expecting to be the first one to speak, but I will. So I'm Stephen Nutter. I'm on Maple Ave, and I just want to thank you all for your presentation. I'll try to be really quick. I do know that through the map program called mapjunction.com, that the mobile site has been a gas station since I think like 1929, which is pretty amazing because that's like when we started having gas stations in the first place. But I just want to say, just to kind of put this in the context how I see it, this Homan site is really important. It's over an acre of space. It's more than 50,000 square feet of space. It's owned by the city. It's the northern gateway to City Hall. It's to the high school, to the library, and now with the new GLX, it's a regional destination. And so that we've waited 30 years to have a T-stop here, and the state and the federal government spent $2.1 billion to make it happen. So it seems kind of incongruous for with Summer Vision 2030 and 2040 and the stationary plan and the Civic Hill plan to keep the Holman site as anything but something really amazing. Like, it really needs to be incredible, and it needs to be incredible as soon as possible. I think it's against our values as a city to make us, and it makes us look like hypocrites in the larger region if we do something with it that's not transit oriented, has a lot of green space to it, that is civic oriented, and that is equitable. And the Gilman community has been working for years with economic development, I think prior to you, Rachel, and others, to really develop an RFP. So, because our goal was to have basically an RFP like ready to be released and shovel ready by the time the GLX folks got out there. And I know there was delays and different and changes and things, but I think as it I get the sense that as a community we're really ready to go, because Gilman, we can't wait. We need a clear, transparent communication from the city on what to do, and I don't really feel like it's been happening. I don't think developers are going to want to take on a project that includes a maybe tank. It's just too much uncertainty for them. So I think either the tank needs to come off the table completely, or be part of an RFP process where they just have to build the tank, in coordination with whatever it is they're building. And I think that we can plan all we want, but until the site is clear and ready to go, I just feel like we're going to have another star market wound in our community for at least another decade, and I don't think that we can really live with that. It's just, I really just hope that we can find a solution just as soon as possible. And thank you.
Okay, I'll call on. Oh, Rachel, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd say Stephen, just to answer your question about the tank, we are not planning to, it's an if it fits at the time, but I think we are fully going ahead assuming no tank. And it's if it happens to work, great. If it doesn't happen to work, we will continue forward. Brian, am I getting that right?
You got it right. Yeah, we do not have any plans to move forward with the tank at the present, and we would hope and expect that a development happens in short order, despite the tank not being there. I think I used "despite" wrong. If in a less than perfect scenario, that, to use Steve your phrase, if this turns into Star Market and we're down the road and we are looking for a tank and there hasn't been any development on there, then that's what I meant about the collaboration and coordination. We don't anticipate that happening at present.
Okay, I'll call on Matt Carlino.
Hey everyone, thank you for the presentation. I think hopefully there are going to be some great things happening here. Viola, the slides were incredible. The streetscape's coming up pretty good. Brian, I've got a couple clarifying questions for you. I appreciate that the city is moving forward with hopefully a more green infrastructure approach, but you kind of punted on some of the nuance with that. We still do have flooding in our neighborhood that needs to be addressed. And 15 years for flooding is pretty much unacceptable, regardless of whether we have a tank or not. And we're still polluting the Mystic and the Alewife. You had specifically mentioned green infrastructure for dealing with contamination, but not with volume, which is not necessarily true. It's been demonstrated other places. But I guess what I really wanted to say is we developed this demonstration project related around the bus stops going away and putting in these rather large, basically bioswales in that what is now public property as a bus stop that we hope to keep as public property as green infrastructure, along with some other things that are not really done within the city, permeable pavements, permeable bike lanes. If we're going to put a bike lane in, that thing should capture stormwater underneath it and with a 4-foot trench. I think they're doing that in Cambridge. We'd like to meet with you and go through what we've been working on, because we think we could take 1 million gallons out of the system for about $3.5 million, which is considerably cheaper than the $92 million for one of the plans in the S2 watershed. This would alleviate problems on Richdale Ave and on Medford Street. And what I think it could do is it could remove kind of any hesitation you have about putting that tank in. Which you've probably not mentioned to everybody. You have 3.5 years to deal with EPA on the long-term control plan. So if we have 2 years of pre-design for the Holman site and 3 years for working with EPA on what they want to see for our pollution reduction, say a developer wants to come in 2 years, that means 0 chance of a tank, right? Because you don't have time to design it. It's more of a question rather than a statement.
I was waiting to see if you were done or if you had more.
Yeah.
So I'll take your first piece first. You don't need to demonstrate to, nobody needs to demonstrate to anybody that green stormwater infrastructure is effective. We've been doing porous pavement on city bike lanes. We've been doing green infrastructure adjacent to bus stops. You're right, we have the luxury, hopefully, when the bus network redesign is executed and removes the 80 bus route, that might be a good location. There is some, or good locations, because there's multiple stops. That of course has to be reviewed with all the subsurface utilities and make sure that there isn't any conflicts there. But we don't need a demonstration. We know it works. And we use it in many, if not most, of our projects. And we're executing that on Spring Hill right now. We will be executing it starting this year on our Clarendon Hill project, also known as Powder House and Alewife Brook. Green infrastructure is a tool and an important part of our toolkit to develop good stormwater infrastructure in the city. The question is whether Medford Street is the next priority location for green and stormwater infrastructure. We have an entire city that has serious flooding challenges, and we have to spread our infrastructure and our resources equitably around the city. And that is what we do. As far as the long-term control plan and the CSO studies that we're doing in collaboration with Cambridge and the MWRA, you're right, it is a multi-year process, and all willing, we'll have a good transit-oriented design project in Homans before we get to a point to making a tank. It will mean that my job will be more difficult in finding a solution. And I'm sure that green stormwater infrastructure will have a part in that. But having designed green stormwater infrastructure systems for nearly 20 years, I know that it is not the only solution. And it can't solve all the problems. So we have to use all the tools in our belt, not just the one that we may most adore at the moment.
Can I follow up, or?
That's up to Ben.
Yeah, if you want to do a quick follow-up, like a minute now.
I don't mind.
Make sure we can get to other people.
Sure. Hopefully the next round of the S2 watershed and all the other watersheds actually acknowledge what you just said on this, because green stormwater infrastructure in the first paragraph of those reports says that it was not used within conjunction of volume reduction anywhere within the city. The consultant specifically pointed out that they were told not to do it. one of the things that a lot of other cities are doing, and you're probably aware of it, is how much less expensive they are rather than doing all of these sewer stormwater separation projects and pipe network redesigns. There's a lot of money that you could potentially save that could be used for other projects within the city. All of those other co-benefits, our schools, and a lot. And I really hope that in the next, before that thing actually becomes finalized, that Dewberry actually takes a different approach and actually considers green infrastructure within the designs, because it was completely absent in the last round. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Teresa?
Hi. Thank you for letting us having this meeting. There's two of us here that one can't speak right now. But I just wanted to say that I really support Matt and Steve, and there's a lot of us that really would like to see more green things done, including open space. And I just have felt really kind of locked out, to be honest. Like you have these meetings and then you say you're going to go back privately, is what I heard, and discuss things and then come back to us again. And that's often how it feels. And I feel like, why can't you sit down and involve like Matt, who has a lot of great ideas? Why can't you have him at your meetings rather than it being like you talk and then you come and present and then we get to say a few things and then you go back and you're wherever you are? It just feels very alienating. And I don't really have a clear sense of who makes decisions. And the flooding here, I would like to know if any other part of the city has people with sewage coming into their houses. I just would like to know that, honestly. And the thing about developers, that's public space, and I just don't understand. I'm not a business person. I don't understand how a developer is going to want to make green space. How are they going to make money off of green space? And why do we have to? I know we have to involve developers, but I feel like we're not setting enough limits with them. Like they can't be making tons of money off of the Homan site. It's a public space. And we need to be able to use it as green space. And I think the high school, there was discussion of things the high school could do with it, not parking. I'm talking about like green space for the high school to use. I would love that. Yeah, there's tons of things we could say. I feel like we're just limited always in what we can say with the city. And I would like us to be more involved in the actual meetings with the city in these meetings that you have, rather than later just making comment. Thank you.
So why don't I, Teresa, answer your second part of that question first about the development side. The Civic Advisory Committee meetings are every month. They are open public meetings, and there is an opportunity for public comment both at the beginning and end of each of those meetings. So I'd definitely recommend coming to those, because that's where a lot of this discussion around the Homan site future is going to happen as we start to develop what those documents look like in that outreach to the development world. In the development world, we also do mean that might include nonprofit developers. That's another option that we might look at. I think what's come up over the last several years is that there is an interest in seeing more retail space, and there is an interest in seeing more affordable housing. And so thinking about how do those things come together, but then also, can there be some serious space in there for community uses? And so there's whether that's large institutions. I think the Y was at one point particularly interested in coming down. There's a lot of engagement around that idea, but also smaller organizations, teen center possibilities. There's been a lot of discussion about all these different kinds of activities, but the city is not really in the business of constructing buildings for uses that are not city or schools. And so that's part of where we're going to be looking for partnership, is that if we're trying to meet multiple goals, where it's not just community facilities, but also facilities like housing, then we need to bring in a partner. And I know you had some stormwater pieces to that too, so I will hand off to Brian.
Yeah. Teresa, your question was pretty short and to the point, and I'll give you a similarly short and to the point answer. And it dismays me to tell you, but yes, many parts of the city have problems with sewage in the basements. Many of those homes are many of those bases are inhabited spaces. Flooding in basements is a serious concern throughout the city. I wish it was only Gilman Square. Not because I want it on Gilman Square, because I wish there was only one place we had to worry about that. But it is throughout. It's throughout the whole city in many locations. And that is one of the key reasons why finding a solution that works as regularly and reliably as possible, that is so important.
Okay, I want to go to a couple of the questions that came in the chat, and then Christine, I'll go to you. We got a question from Jim Kaplan asking, has there been any discussion with the owner of the mobile station to see if he would sell? Could the city buy the property directly from the owner? So I'll give that one to Rachel.
The property owner has had it on the market for the last couple of years, and I know he has been entertaining offers. The price, we would not been able to come to a conclusion for a price that the city could just purchase outright. But he has been entertaining offers, and that this is part of why we want to sort of do another outreach in this before getting into the urban renewal question, and see if we can figure out a way to have that conversation sort of be more public and more official.
All right, and then we got a question from Scott Farrell asking, please ask Brian Postlethwaite to clarify the variables that might change his position. He said, at present, how can he give the community more confidence that the tank is not likely to happen? And then there was also a piece about, it'd be interesting to know where in our part of Somerville there is an amazing tree canopy. I think more on the first piece.
Yeah, sadly, I don't know if I don't have a good mental map of tree canopy in Somerville. As far as, I think he's asking, what are the factors that would make us convince us that a tank is not the right solution in Gilman Square? And I don't know if no good engineer makes up his mind of what he wants before he studies it. So I couldn't tell you what would convince me not to do it or what would convince me to do it. It really depends on the actual conditions, when we get to designing it, how we've been able to build out other parts of our system, where we can drain to, what are the characteristics of the storm that we're trying to solve. One of the challenges with Gilman Square is that it floods halfway into the storm. And by that point, you want to have, if you're going to be flooding halfway into the storm, you want to have something that is dry and empty at the time that the square begins to flood. And as soon as the square begins to flood, you want to have something that's empty that you can overflow into, that you can fill up, instead of the square filling up. And this might be getting a little too into the whole green stormwater infrastructure conversation, but they fill up at the beginning of the storm. So, and that's the time when Gilman Square doesn't need the flood mitigation, because the pipes work well then. So I don't know exactly what today could change that mind, because it's really more important to understand what are the existing conditions when we're at a point to do the design that would inform what tools we use. Maybe by that time, a tank isn't the right tool for the solution. Maybe at that time, green stormwater infrastructure is a better tool for the solution. Most likely it's a combination. Maybe we'll have come up with a completely different technique by then that will be better than all of it. It's really hard to say, but we do have these first two projects, primarily the one in downstream in S2 to improve trunk capacity. And after we do that, we'll have a better sense of what's going on in Gilman Square and the S2 region and the outfall to better inform us what the right solution is for Gilman Square when it comes to flooding.
Ben,
Ben,
would you like me to answer the tree question?
Yes.
Great. I'm Louisa Oliveira, Director of Parks and Public Space and Urban Forestry, for the city of Somerville. Someone had asked which neighborhood has that healthy tree canopy. We have about 15,000 trees in Somerville. You can guess that areas that are less developed, less densely developed, have more tree canopy. But I'm thrilled that you're asking about trees because we released a urban forest management plan, which is online and has so much data about trees, including an inventory of every tree in the city. So I encourage you to have a look at those maps and have a look at the data. And yeah, just thrilled that you care about trees because we do too.
Ben's internet dropped for a moment. He'll be back in just a second. Before we come to the three folks with their hands up, we had one other question in the chat just about where to get the schedule for those public meetings. I am going to drop a link to both the city's calendar and also to the Gilman Square site as well. We have more questions coming in on the chat, but I do want to go back to we'll alternate a little bit. So let's go to Christine next.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm not going to harp back on the green infrastructure thing. I will say just to Brian, I appreciate that you all are trying to be very thorough and detailed in your studies. But while you are all doing that, for the last several decades, folks' basements have been flooding. And it's been causing health and emotional damage to folks, especially on Richdale Ave, who have been suffering. I mean, long before I ever moved to this neighborhood, there was a photograph taken of someone in a kayaking down Richdale Ave. So while I appreciate that as an engineer, your job is to be detailed and thorough, I just want to point out that folks are suffering. And that green infrastructure can take the edge off of that suffering and in very short order, meaning that if we can capture what we believe is about 1 million gallons of water in the green infrastructure system before it even hits the sewer system, that means by the time we get to the midpoint of the storm, that sewer infrastructure system is still available to take in water. So regardless of whether the flooding happens at the beginning, middle, or end of the storm, green infrastructure will delay that flooding. And it's been proven in countless cities across the United States. So I just want to point that out. And now I kind of want to switch to what Rachel and Ben were talking about in terms of activating the site temporarily. I'm a little dismayed that we're talking about parking and using the Homan site for dumping snow. I think we're all kind of sick of being the dumping ground for anything, especially in the heart of our square. And I also want to point out that I think, I've mentioned this before to both Ben and Rachel that the Homan site is a brownfield site. We're talking about a building that has been the Homan's building that was demolished there. There was PCBs, asbestos, lead, in the materials that were demolished. We know that that site is polluted. We know that the adjacent site has use limitations on it, the mobile station, due to old leaky tanks that weren't fully remediated. We know that asbestos, lead, and PCBs were all found in the soils up at the high school, and that there was concern about those hazardous materials having migrated off of that hill and down into the T station area and likely the Homan site. And we know that that site also stored hazardous soils that were then eventually put back in other areas. So it did not need to be mitigated and removed permanently or dealt with. So we know that that site is hazardous. And if we are going to have any sort of conversations about temporary activation, there needs to be an extensive testing that's done on that site and likely a remediation. And I just want to know how long that will take and if the city is looking at that.
We have started to look into that and are going to build that into this request for ARPA funding to make sure that we can answer what we need to answer for the question of what happens with surface use, right? Not digging into the land. That would be something that would happen only during the long term. But if we were doing activity on the surface, what would we need to do to make sure that it is safe? And I'm forgetting if there was another part of your question that we should answer before we go to Tim. Apologies, Christine. Is there anything else that we should touch on there?
No, I think it was more just a comment for Brian. So unless he has something to say about it, it was more just a comment for Brian.
Okay, thank you. Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Hood. I live on Dartmouth Street. I just had a comment and a question. The comment was a reaction to how some of the information was presented. It was mentioned that the stormwater retention tank, it may be possible to be the best solution. And I can see that in terms of stormwater management and engineering only. But I think in terms of trying to find a solution to develop the site, respond to housing needs, economic development needs, I think it may be the worst solution. So I just wanted to make that clarification and comment. And then my question is the Summer Vision 2030 plan, 2040 plan. It talks about green infrastructure, and I'm just questioning the timing of the green infrastructure study and why it hasn't been done previously, specifically given the history of the flooding on the site. I would expect the city to take that as the first step, and then if green infrastructure can't satisfy all of the loads, then I would think that we would be talking about a tank. So I'm just not sure why we're even talking about a tank at all if that green infrastructure plan hasn't occurred. So if someone can comment on the timing of the plan, and then why a tank is even in the conversation right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. As far as timing goes, I think the short answer is our city stormwater master plan is meant to solve or meant to address, because we'll never solve flooding entirely, but meant to address and reduce flooding substantially throughout the city. The magnitude of the problem is substantially larger than what green stormwater infrastructure alone can solve. And we are in the master plan study was the intent to find what are the substantial solutions that will address the problem statement that we delivered. We know that any constructed solution that we implement will include some amount of green stormwater infrastructure. We know that is the most effective based on our studies for water quality. It does have some impact to water quantity, but the quantity does not address substantially enough the quantity of stormwater that we have to deal with. So when we were doing the master plan, the most effective way to make decisions and priorities, which is the goal of the master plan, is to chart a course for us as a community to start executing projects that will reduce flooding throughout the city. And so that study needs to include the substantial solutions that are going to do that. And those solutions are going to be changes to our stormwater infrastructure system, our existing system, which is composed predominantly of pipes, and looking at the millions upon millions of gallons of storage that we need to provide. If we got rid of all of the parking spaces in Gilman Square and replaced them with green stormwater infrastructure, we wouldn't move the needle enough to impact the change that we're trying to accomplish. And I'm not, GSI has a place, it is a tool, but we need to use all of the tools at our disposal, and we need to solve the problem, not just move the needle.
Okay, so if we want to hear from Alicia Bird. Also, thank you everyone for the patience with my tech.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say, which you might not know, because someone said that our street floods halfway through the storm. The two houses across the street from me flood even when the street doesn't flood. So the water first goes into their basements and then the street floods. And I don't think you knew that. Also, I am one of the people who would like to have a tank put in, because I have water come up to the second stair of my house. I had to close basement windows so water doesn't come into my house anymore. And I put in two, I think they're called dry wells at the front of my property, so that the water from the street goes into them instead of going into my backyard and flooding my house through the back door there. So no, it's not. It isn't halfway through the storm that the flooding starts. The flooding starts as soon as the storm starts, but you don't see it because you're not in people's basements.
Alicia, I completely agree with you on that point. I was referring specifically to the flooding in the actual surface flooding in Gilman Square at the intersection of School and Medford. School and Medford. Yes, the engineering division is quite aware that that our combined sewer system backs up, and in many cases, especially homes that don't have a backflow preventer on their sewer line, that is the predominant way that basements flood from the sewer, is through their lowest plumbing fixture. I believe we even talked about this many years ago before COVID at the high school during a meeting. And to dovetail with, I think it was Teresa's question earlier, that also is a problem throughout the city. And is one of the key challenges that our reviewing team has when developers come in and try to do basement units and below grade apartment dwellings. Our review on making sure that their foundation walls are waterproof and that their plumbing system is backflow proof is really incredible. And that team works really hard to make sure that those problems are not exacerbated in new development. We don't have control over existing homes, but those are critical. And maybe this is too much information. I have this problem too in my house, and I live in Somerville, and I had to put in a bunch of dry wells and infiltration on my house so that I didn't get flooding coming down my back steps too. So yes. Please understand, I know this is hard. And the entire team that I work with is dedicated to solving this. I mean, amongst many other problems, but this is critical.
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing? The house across the street is a brand new reconstruction of the house, they have the water is coming down their cellar stairs. It's not coming up through the sewer like happens. And I haven't had any come up through the sewer since I had a new sewer put in. And I don't get flooding. I'm talking about the people across the street.
And Ben, we probably should move on. Alicia, I know exactly what you're talking about. That particular development really what was just finishing up and being approved when I started with the city, and that was the building that catalyzed the effort that our wonderful team does now. I wish we could go back and change history on that one.
No, this is directly across the street from me, not the development that's a whole new building.
No, I know exactly which one. It's gray. It's got like a little cupola type thing on the top of it.
13.
Yes, I know exactly which house you're talking about. Yes.
It's awful.
It is.
All right. So thank you everyone for the comments. I know that there are still questions, but we're at 7:48, and so we need to wrap up the meeting. Obviously this hasn't been on the screen the whole time, but it was up here for a while. If there are any other questions that you want to communicate to the staff that presented here tonight, we really encourage you to reach out and please send something over email. I do also just want to highlight a couple of other ways that people can get involved moving forward. So tomorrow there's a joint meeting of the City Council, Land Use and Transportation Committee, and Somerville Planning Board on ground floor commercial spaces fronting pedestrian streets, which can be relevant in Gilman. Next Monday, as Christine mentioned, the Gilman Square Neighborhood Association will be hosting their monthly meeting. And then on Thursday, February 23rd, from 5:30 to 7 is the next Gilman Square meeting. And if you've been sending questions in the chat, we appreciate it. Please just communicate through email to send these questions, and we'll also be collecting these questions afterwards. And thank you again also for the patience with the tech difficulties that we had here tonight. I also want to quickly call out the Summer Voice pages that people can use to kind of stay updated on these projects. So if you go to voice.somervillema.gov/projects, you can check out each of the different projects that might be relevant to you, such as the Gilman Square plan implementation and the citywide drainage and water quality master plan. And with that, I do want to thank staff for their time, and also for all the attendees for their time tonight and coming in, asking these questions and staying engaged with this. We really appreciate it. And yeah, thank everybody.
Hey, Ben.
Yep.
Council Klingon here. What did I miss? No, just kidding. No, I heard that it sounds like the gist of it was that Brian, by the way, everybody, 299 ZBA unanimous vote. Very exciting for Winter Hill. That passed. And it sounded like Director Postlewaite said that if a development happens there before the tank, it's his job to find a new, essentially, right? Is that the takeaway, that they'll have to find another location? Did I get the message?
Councilor
correctly?
Klingon, that's a good synopsis.
Okay. So that's good news. And just listening to the conversation at the end here, you know, as you stated, we're all well aware of the flooding issues, and you know, hopefully we can start getting some relief over there through a variety of ways, you know, outside of the tank, including, like you said, infrastructure, green infrastructure on Medford Street and wherever else we need it. And but thank you all for your time, and I will see you.
Thank you all. Our interpreters, we have to let them leave. So appreciate everyone's patience tonight, and thank you for all the great commentary and questions in the chat. And if we didn't have a chance to connect, we'll hopefully connect on email.